thought it was time for a good old conversation with you about what actually got me into the breathwork and coaching space, because this didn't just happen overnight. It came to me from over 14 years in the early education sector as a leader, a manager, a mentor, and everything else in between. I genuinely loved what I did. I loved creating really holistic, wholesome spaces, not just for children to learn, but for families to feel like they had an extended home, a place that they could walk into and feel safe, and equally for the teams I had the honor of working with. But from the very beginning, I always knew there was a gap, a huge gap. And the more time I spent in the space, I simply couldn't unsee it. There simply wasn't enough space for wellness, for regulation, for emotional support, for children to really be able to openly express themselves, and including the team members. Honestly, everyone in the space was working hard to just try to get through the day. I often saw how hard it was for adults to be this authentic expression of themselves while working with children. And children thrive off authenticity. They read energy better than most adults ever will. And I just kept seeing these gaps. At the same time, I was bringing in so much of what I was passionate about in my own health and wellness journey. Because this didn't start in adulthood, this started when I was a teenager. For me, going back to my teenage years, I went through a lot of bullying in high school. My mental health wasn't great. I really struggled with anxiety and depression. And the one thing that anchored me was movement, exercise, and I loved running. Running was therapeutic for me, and through running I became really intrigued with the mindful practice of breathing. I didn't have all the science language back then, I just knew it shifted something. My mind would race and then I'd anchor into breath and rhythm, usually with my dog beside me, and something would change. I could steady myself for the first time, I could focus, and I could somewhat drown out the noise of very intrusive thoughts. And that curiosity stayed with me. But all I really knew at the time was teaching. I'd invested years into becoming a teacher, so even though I felt like there was more in me to share, I honestly believed I was restricted to that bubble. It was all I knew. It was the belief that kept running through my system. So I anchored into being the best version of that identity. Then motherhood arrived in 2019. I fell pregnant and I gave birth to my beautiful son at the end of March 2020, right as the world went into lockdown. And that's when everything changed for me. I was in a very unstable relationship during my pregnancy, and my pregnancy had also been very, very challenging for me. I went through separation 4 months later after giving birth, and the only real anchor for me was my workouts, my breath, my holistic wellness practices, and diving deeper into what it truly means to discover ourselves. I was learning more about myself more than ever before. I was running almost daily, studying breath, oxygen, sleep, because sleep was a huge thing. My little man did not sleep, and I needed answers of how to move forward out of the rut that I was in. This time in my life was transformational. When I returned to my role as a manager after 14 months, it was harder than ever, especially having my own child. It shifted everything. I was parenting in a very unconventional way. I was deeply anchored into well-being, and I could feel that the role I was in, it was no longer a fit for who I was becoming. And even though I had the honor of starting a brand new early learning service, designing 4 beautiful classrooms, building incredible spaces for families, something that I dreamt of, there was also this part of me that knew there was so much more. I found myself coaching 1 or 2 parents most days, coaching educators, talking about regulation, boundaries, identity, ways to regulate, ways to hold space for children. And that became a really big turning point for me. I started asking, how do I create a lifestyle and a business that actually works for me, that complements the life that I'm building, that gives me sustainability, especially as a solo parent at the time? And so for me, I started creating. I started going and immersing myself in women's circles, meditation practices, sharing tools with teens, taking big courageous moves before I had it all figured out. I started running workshops around what I was learning, and then I moved to the Sunshine Coast and started my life over in a place my heart knew was meant to be. Within weeks, I found a space and started holding these women's circles that I had envisioned. And if you'd asked me to explain the structure back then, I couldn't have given you a perfect breakdown. It was all completely intuitive. I was simply guided by myself and what was coming through, and based on what I could feel and see and read in the room. And from there, I brought everything to life. I've had the honor of coaching so many beautiful humans now, watching their transformations unfold, building businesses behind the scenes, working with incredible companies in the health and wellness space, running retreats, engaging in incredible programs in wellness centers, going into corporate spaces, and so much more. And over again, people have often asked me, why don't you have your own certification yet? The way you do things is very, very different. And I'd often find myself thinking, who am I to do that? But eventually, I realized that doubt was just another identity layer that I had to outgrow. So I started sculpting, designing, and pouring my lifelong learning into not just a breathwork training, but a container that weaves together breath, identity, somatic intelligence, inner world work, shadow, inner child, all these wonderful tools that don't often get taught, because so often that part of us is running the show. And we tie it all back to mastering who we are, because you can do all the work in the world, but if you don't anchor into who you see yourself as, if you don't become the architect of that identity, it becomes very hard to hold space with this deep level of courage and steadiness. And so I weave this all together, then I layered in business takeoff and expansion, because it's one thing to embody this work, to be practicing daily, to be holding space, but it's another thing to build a sustainable life from it. There's so much that comes up in our headspace around stepping into this role. I want people to know that they're not tied to a 9 till 5, they're not stuck living someone else's vision, and they can reduce stress, improve sleep, uplift well-being, and create a life that supports them too. So yes, we do talk about systems, we talk about AI, we talk about simplicity and sustainable growth, because we can't ignore that world. We learn how to work with it, and when we do, it becomes a really great tool and companion to take out a lot of the background work. I know what it feels like to not want to deal with the back end stuff, so I've learned it, refined it, and now I hand it back in a way that doesn't feel daunting. Fast forward to now, I have created a life that feels aligned, balanced, deeply human, and I'm in a beautiful relationship where as a family we get to navigate life together. I'm still learning, I'm still devoted to growth, and still a student of life, and always will be. And I get to share that with my family. So when I say this work changed my life, I mean it in the most grounded way. So why not step into something that's deeply rewarding for yourself? Why not create spaces that genuinely transform lives, whether it's in your workplace, perhaps it's with friends, family, or maybe you do feel a deep pull to start coaching and sharing this medicine with the world. Why not surround yourself with people who get you, who resonate, who become lifelong friends? Why not build something sustainable that supports a better way of living for you too? That's how I got here, by following the thread that never stopped pulling.